I woke up to a faint knock at my door, soft, hesitant, and unsettling. My heart pounded as I checked the clock. 3:30 a.m. Who could it be at this hour? It's me. Ryan, came the trembling voice. My stepson. I froze, my pulse racing. Can I come in? I had no idea that opening that door would unravel my life in ways I could never undo. Ryan wasn't a stranger to me, but he might as well have been. He was my husband Daniel's son from his first marriage. A quiet, introverted 20-year-old who always seemed to linger on the edges of the house like a shadow. When Daniel and I got married 2 years ago, I thought blending our families would be simple. I had no children of my own, and Ryan had grown up without much stability. I wanted to be a positive influence in his life, someone he could trust. But he kept his distance. Most days, he avoided me entirely, retreating to his room or disappearing to hang out with friends. The rare times we did talk, it was brief and polite, no warmth, no connection. I told myself it was just the awkwardness of his age, but deep down, I wondered if it was something more. Daniel, on the other hand, had always been the opposite. Charming, confident, and dependable. But lately, even he had started to pull away. Long business trips, late nights at the office. Excuses I tried not to question. I told myself it was work, that he was doing it for us. But that didn't stop the ache of loneliness that grew deeper with each passing day. I tried to fill the void, yoga classes, book clubs, redecorating the house, but nothing seemed to help. The nights felt the worst. The silence echoed, reminding me of everything I was missing. And then there was Ryan. In recent months, something about him had started to shift. He wasn't just the shy, awkward boy anymore. He was growing into himself, broader shoulders, sharper features, and a quiet confidence that was impossible to ignore. I hated myself for noticing, for letting my eyes linger too long when he walked by in a t-shirt that fit just a little too well. But it was harmless. Just passing thoughts, nothing more. At least, that's what I told myself. Until that night. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, barefoot, disheveled, and vulnerable, I felt something shift. And I knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same again. Ryan stood in the doorway, his bare feet shifting against the floor. He looked uncertain, his eyes flickering between mine and the empty space behind me. My bed broke, he said quietly. I didn't know where else to go. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. This was innocent, I kept telling myself that. He was just a boy who needed a place to sleep. But the way he looked at me, his gaze lingering just a moment too long, made me question everything. Come in, I said before I could stop myself. The door creaked shut behind him, and suddenly the room felt smaller, warmer. He moved carefully, his shoulders broad and tense under the thin fabric of his t-shirt. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the sheet tightly around me, trying to steady my breath. Sorry for waking you, he mumbled, sitting down on the other side of the bed. It's fine, I said, though my voice trembled slightly. The silence that followed felt heavy, filled with things neither of us dared to say. I could feel his presence, too close, too aware. I turned to look at him, and that's when I caught it. The way his eyes flickered to the curve of my shoulder, the exposed skin above the neckline of my nightgown. He looked away quickly, but it was too late. I should have said something, set a boundary, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I lay down, facing away from him, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Minutes passed. Then hours. I couldn't sleep. Every shift he made sent a jolt through me. I became hyper-aware of every breath he took, every rustle of the sheets. And then it happened. I felt the bed dip behind me. My breath caught as I realized he had turned toward me. I could feel it, his eyes, his warmth, his hesitation. Emily, he whispered. I froze. What is it? I asked, my voice barely audible. There was a pause, so long I thought he might change his mind. But then he said it. I can't stop thinking about you. The words hit me like a punch, and yet they sent a thrill through me that I couldn't explain. Ryan, I started, but he cut me off. I know it's wrong, he said, his voice strained. But I see the way you look at me too. I turned to face him, and the intensity in his eyes stole my breath away. This can't happen, I whispered. Then tell me to leave. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stayed frozen as his hand brushed against mine, light and hesitant, like he was testing the boundary we both knew was there. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I didn't want him to stop. The air between us felt heavier than ever, like it was alive, buzzing, electric. My heart pounded as Ryan's fingers brushed against mine again, this time lingering. I should have pulled away. I should have told him to stop. But I didn't. Instead, I let my hand stay there, trembling but unmoving, as his fingertips traced delicate patterns over my skin. "Emily," he whispered, his voice low, almost pleading. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the desperation in his eyes. The same desperation I felt twisting inside me. "This is wrong," I said, but even I could hear how unconvincing the words sounded. "Then tell me to stop," he said again, his voice thick with emotion. I couldn't. Instead, I let him close the distance between us. He leaned in slowly, hesitantly, as if waiting for me to change my mind. But when his lips finally touched mine, soft and tentative, I felt something snap inside me. The kiss deepened almost instantly, years of loneliness and longing pouring out of me in waves I couldn't control. My hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer as the weight of everything I had tried to suppress melted away. I knew it was reckless, dangerous, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt alive. His hands moved carefully, exploring me like I was fragile, breakable. And maybe I was. But at that moment, I didn't care. We lost ourselves completely. Hours passed like seconds, and by the time the sun began to creep through the curtains, we were tangled in each other, breathless, exposed, and terrified of what we had done. I lay there, staring at the ceiling as Ryan's arm draped lazily across my waist. My body still hummed with the echoes of what had happened, but my mind was already racing. "What now?" I whispered, more to myself than to him. He stirred, pressing closer to me. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I don't regret it." His words sent a shiver through me. And that's when reality hit. This wasn't a fantasy. It wasn't a dream. It was real, messy, complicated, and impossible to take back. I sat up, pulling the sheet tightly around me as guilt flooded in. "We can't do this again," I said, my voice shaking. He sat up too, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You don't mean that," he said. "I have to." I stood, grabbing my robe and pacing the room, trying to clear my head. But it was no use. I could still feel his touch, still taste him on my lips. "Please don't push me away," he said, his voice breaking. "I need time," I whispered. And before he could say another word, I walked out, leaving him there in the dim morning light. But as I closed the door behind me, I knew it wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The house felt suffocating in the days that followed. I tried to keep my distance, throwing myself into chores, errands, anything to keep my mind occupied. But no matter what I did, I couldn't escape the memory of that night, or the way Ryan had looked at me when I left him in my room. I could still feel his touch, his lips, his breath against my skin. And every time I passed his room, my pulse quickened, my thoughts spiraling into places I didn't dare to linger. But Ryan wasn't avoiding me. He lingered. In the kitchen when I was cooking, in the living room when I was pretending to watch TV. Every glance, every accidental brush of his hand against mine sent me reeling, unraveling the fragile wall I'd tried to build between us. I knew it was only a matter of time before something gave way. It happened one night, 3 days after that first mistake. Daniel called to tell me he was coming home early, surprising me after weeks of distance. I should have felt relieved, but all I felt was dread. Ryan had come home late that night. I heard the door creak as he entered, his footsteps echoing down the hall. My heart raced as he stopped outside my bedroom door. He didn't knock this time. Instead, the door opened slowly, and he stepped inside. "Ryan," I hissed, pulling my robe tighter around me. "You can't be here." His eyes locked on mine, and I saw it again, that hunger, that need. "I can't stay away," he said, his voice low and raw. "You have to." I moved toward him, trying to push him back, but he caught my wrist, his touch sending shivers down my spine. "Don't lie to me," he said. "You don't want me to go." I froze, unable to deny it. But before I could answer, I heard it, the sound of keys rattling in the front door. "Daniel, go," I whispered urgently, shoving him toward the bathroom. "Go now." He hesitated for a moment, his eyes searching mine, before disappearing into the shadows just as the bedroom door opened. Daniel stepped inside, smiling like nothing had changed. "I missed you," he said, crossing the room to kiss me. His lips felt wrong. I pulled away quickly, forcing a smile. "You're home early. Is that a problem?" he asked, frowning. "No, of course not." I turned toward the dresser, desperate to hide the panic flooding my face. My eyes darted to the bathroom door. It was closed, but I could feel Ryan's presence on the other side, and my pulse thundered in my ears. Daniel came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "You seem tense," he said softly. I forced a laugh. "Just surprised, that's all." But he didn't let go. Instead, his hands wandered, his lips brushing my neck in a way that felt foreign, detached. And all I could think about was Ryan, only a few feet away, hidden and waiting. I stiffened. Daniel noticed. "What's wrong?" he asked, pulling back. "Nothing," I said too quickly, stepping out of his reach. But it was too late. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the room, his gaze landing on the unmade bed, the sheets tangled and wrinkled. "Emily." His voice had changed, sharper now, suspicious. "Why is the bed like that?" My throat tightened. I wasn't feeling well," I stammered. "I slept during the day." He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes. Then his gaze shifted to the bathroom door. "No. Who's in there?" he demanded. "No one," I said quickly, stepping between him and the door. "Move," he snapped. "Daniel, don't." He pushed past me, throwing the door open before I could stop him. And there he was. Ryan. Shirtless, frozen in place, his eyes wide with panic. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel turned back to me, his face pale, his eyes wild with disbelief. "What the hell is this?" I opened my mouth to explain, but no words came out. "You're sleeping with him?" he shouted, his voice breaking. "No." I cried, but it was useless. He turned back to Ryan, shoving him hard against the wall. "You sick bastard. Stop." I screamed, grabbing Daniel's arm, but he shoved me away. "You ruined us," he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "Both of you." Ryan tried to speak, but Daniel wasn't listening. He grabbed his keys and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. I collapsed onto the floor, sobbing as Ryan knelt beside me, his hand trembling as he reached for mine. "What do we do now?" he whispered. I looked at him, and for the first time, I had no answers. I had destroyed everything, and I didn't know how to fix it. The echo of the slamming door lingered long after Daniel left. I sat on the floor, my knees pulled to my chest, struggling to catch my breath. My world was collapsing, and I had no one to blame but myself. Ryan knelt beside me, his face pale and filled with panic. "Emily," he started, but I shook my head. "Don't," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Tears burned in my eyes, and I wiped them away angrily. How had I let this happen? How had I destroyed my marriage, my home, my life? Ryan reached for me again, but this time I pulled away. "We can't do this," I said, my voice trembling. "Do what?" he asked, his voice raw. "Pretend it didn't happen? Pretend you don't feel it too." His words made me flinch. I couldn't deny it, not to him, not to myself. But what we felt didn't matter anymore. It couldn't. "This was a mistake," I said, forcing myself to stand. "Stop calling it that," he snapped, his voice breaking. "You weren't a mistake to me." I turned to face him, my chest tightening. "You're Daniel's son," I said firmly. "We can't." He cut me off. "I'm not just his son," he said, stepping closer. "I'm more than that, and you know it." I shook my head, backing away. "No," I whispered. "This has to end." Ryan's face fell, and for the first time I saw it, the heartbreak I had caused not just Daniel but Ryan too. He looked at me like I was his whole world, and I had shattered it. "I can't stay here," he said suddenly. "Ryan, wait." But he was already moving, grabbing his jacket and keys. I followed him to the door, my heart racing. "Don't leave like this," I pleaded. He turned to look at me one last time, his eyes filled with pain. "Goodbye, Emily," he said softly. And then he was gone. The house felt emptier than ever after that. I spent hours pacing the rooms, replaying every moment, every decision that led me to this point. I thought about calling Daniel, begging for forgiveness, but I knew it was pointless. The look in his eyes when he saw Ryan said it all. He would never trust me again. When night fell, I sat alone in the living room, a glass of wine in my hand, staring at the front door, half expecting Ryan to come back. But he didn't. Instead, the silence stretched on, heavier than ever. Days turned into weeks. Daniel filed for divorce. He didn't even give me a chance to explain. The paperwork arrived in a plain envelope, cold and impersonal, just like the conversations we had after. He moved out immediately, taking his things without a word. The house, once filled with life, felt hollow like a tomb. Ryan never came back. I thought about reaching out to him, but what would I even say? That I missed him? That I hated myself for pushing him away? That, despite everything, a part of me still wanted him? No, there were no words that could fix this. I forced myself to move forward, cleaning out closets, redecorating, erasing every trace of the life I had destroyed. But I couldn't erase the memories. I couldn't erase the way he had made me feel, alive, wanted, seen. I couldn't erase the guilt. One night, weeks later, my phone buzzed. I froze when I saw his name on the screen, Ryan. My hands shook as I opened the message. "I miss you." Tears welled in my eyes and my heart pounded. I wanted to respond, to tell him I missed him too. But I didn't. I deleted the message and turned off my phone, knowing that no matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't go back. I couldn't undo what I had done, and I couldn't make it right. But as I sat there in the dark, I couldn't ignore the truth. A part of me didn't want to. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog, heavy, unrelenting, and impossible to escape. I tried to convince myself that time would heal the damage, that eventually the guilt would fade, and I could move on. But no matter how hard I tried, the echoes of what had happened lingered. I sat alone in the house, surrounded by the ghosts of memories I couldn't erase. The faint smell of Ryan's cologne still clung to the fabric of the couch. Daniel's picture frames had left outlines on the walls where they once hung, reminders of the life we had built and destroyed. I spent hours replaying it all, trying to make sense of how I had let things spiral so far out of control. Was it loneliness? Desperation? Or something darker? I told myself I had been vulnerable, that I just needed someone to see me. But that excuse rang hollow. The truth was I had made a choice. I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And now I had to live with the consequences. The divorce went through quickly, too quickly. Daniel didn't want to fight. He just wanted out. When we met to sign the papers, he barely looked at me. "I don't hate you," he said quietly, sliding the documents across the table. "But I can't forgive you." His words cut deeper than I expected. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I'm sorry," I whispered. But he didn't respond. He stood, gathered his things, and walked out of my life without another word. And just like that, it was over. Ryan never came back. Part of me had hoped he would, that we could somehow find a way to make sense of what happened. But deep down, I knew it was better this way. He deserved better than me, better than this mess I had dragged him into. Still, there were nights when I lay awake, wondering where he was, what he was doing, and if he ever thought about me the way I thought about him. But I would never know. Months passed, and slowly, I began to rebuild. I started therapy, desperate to understand the emptiness that had driven me to ruin everything. I learned that loneliness can be dangerous, that it can twist your perception, making you reach for things that were never meant to be yours. I learned that desire can be intoxicating, but it can also be destructive. And most of all, I learned that some mistakes leave scars that never fully heal. I moved into a smaller apartment, far away from the house where everything had fallen apart. I sold the furniture, painted the walls, and tried to start fresh. But no matter how much I changed my surroundings, I couldn't escape the pieces of myself I had left behind. I tried to convince myself that I was stronger now, wiser. But some days, the guilt felt just as sharp as it had the night Daniel walked out the door. I still think about Ryan sometimes, about what might have happened if I had made a different choice. But then I remind myself of what I lost, my marriage, my home, my sense of self. No fleeting moment of passion is worth that price. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Desire can blind you. It can make you believe in fantasies that were never meant to exist. And by the time you realize the truth, it's already too late. I will carry that truth with me for the rest of my life. What would you have done in her situation? Could you walk away from temptation, or would you risk everything for a fleeting moment of passion? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your perspective. If you found this story gripping, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more shocking and emotional stories like this one. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.